The conference room fell silent when Grant said it. 10 executives around the mahogany table, morning coffee growing cold, all eyes fixed on the presentation screen where my data-driven marketing model glowed in perfect clarity. I'd spent 3 months building the algorithm that could save our company's failing app, working nights and weekends to perfect every variable. Grant leaned back in his leather chair, that familiar smirk spreading across his face like oil on water. His expensive suit couldn't hide the smugness that radiated from every pore. "We don't need your ideas, Allison," he said, his voice cutting through the room's tension. "Stick to spreadsheets." Laughter rippled around the table. Not loud, but enough to make my cheeks burn. Marketing directors who'd praised my work in private meetings suddenly found their notebooks fascinating. The CFO cleared his throat and moved to the next agenda item. I swallowed my anger, forcing my voice to stay level and professional. "Of course. You're the expert." Grant's smile widened as he dismissed my presentation with a wave of his manicured hand. The screen went dark, taking months of research with it. But that was the day I stopped giving him my ideas for free. He just didn't know it yet. 7 years. That's how long I'd been at Ellison and Reid Marketing, climbing from junior analyst to senior strategist through pure determination and late nights that turned into early mornings. Every campaign Grant presented to clients, every strategy that earned him industry recognition, every innovation that built his reputation had my fingerprints all over it. He called me his right hand, but never gave me credit where it mattered. No raises beyond cost of living increases. No promotions that came with real authority. No bylines on the industry publications that featured our work. Allison's got great instincts, he'd tell potential clients, always careful to position himself as the mentor who'd shaped my raw talent into something useful. She really understands execution. I'd smile and nod, playing the grateful protege while building campaigns that generated millions in revenue for companies whose executives probably couldn't pick me out of a lineup. The breaking point should have come sooner. Maybe when he submitted my integrated social media strategy for the Chicago Marketing Excellence Award with his name as sole author. Maybe when he got promoted to creative director based on metrics I'd developed. But I stayed loyal, believing that good work would eventually speak for itself. That belief died in a conference room on a Tuesday morning in October. The office was empty when I returned that night, security guards nodding as I badged into the building after 10 p.m. My desk lamp cast a small circle of light in the darkened marketing department, computers humming quietly in the silence. I wasn't supposed to see Grant's laptop sitting open on the conference table, screen still glowing with tomorrow's presentation slides. But curiosity has always been my weakness, and something about the title slide made me pause. Revolutionary Predictive Analytics for Modern Marketing, it read, with Grant's name prominently displayed as the primary presenter. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the slides. Every graph, every data point, every strategic recommendation was lifted directly from my presentation. Not paraphrased or adapted, but copied with surgical precision. He'd even used my exact wording. Consumer behavior follows predictable patterns when analyzed through machine learning algorithms that account for seasonal variations, demographic shifts, and psychological triggers. The presentation was scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow, when Grant would stand before the CEO and board of directors to unveil his latest breakthrough in marketing innovation. My breakthrough. My 3 months of research. My late nights and weekend testing sessions. All of it repackaged as his vision for the company's future. I sat in the back row of the boardroom, notepad open, pen ready to take meeting minutes like the dutiful analyst everyone expected me to be. The executive team filed in with their coffee and optimism, ready to witness Grant's latest moment of genius. He commanded the room with practiced ease, clicking through slides that contained my voice, my insights, my months of careful research. His presentation was flawless because the foundation was solid. I'd built it to withstand scrutiny. This predictive model will revolutionize how we approach campaign development, Grant explained, gesturing at charts that mapped consumer behavior patterns I'd identified through hundreds of hours of data analysis. Applause filled the room when he finished. The CEO stood to shake his hand, already discussing implementation timelines and budget allocations. Marketing directors leaned forward to ask technical questions that Grant answered with confidence born from stolen preparation. He caught my eye across the room as the meeting ended, his grin wide and triumphant. "Teamwork makes the dream work, right, Allison?" he said loud enough for the departing executives to hear. That's when I decided, fine, let's be a team. But this time, I'd be the one setting the rules. The change was subtle at first. I stopped volunteering ideas during brainstorming sessions, offering only the basic analysis Grant explicitly requested. No creative suggestions. No innovative approaches. No late-night emails with breakthrough insights that could save struggling campaigns. When clients asked for my opinion during meetings, I'd smile politely and defer to Grant's expertise. When junior analysts brought me their ideas, I directed them to submit everything through proper channels, which meant Grant's approval first. 3 weeks into my new approach, Grant cornered me by the coffee machine, his usual confidence tinged with something that might have been concern. "No spark lately, Allison?" he asked, stirring cream into his coffee with unnecessary focus. "You seem different." Distracted. I looked up from my plain black coffee, meeting his eyes with practiced innocence. "Just following your lead, Grant. Sticking to spreadsheets like you suggested." He laughed, but the sound felt forced. "Come on, you know I value your input. You're part of the team." "Of course," I replied, walking back to my desk where I quietly began downloading copies of every file I'd authored over the past 2 years. Some teams require better documentation than others. The HR exit interview took place in a sterile conference room with motivational posters that felt like corporate propaganda. Patricia from Human Resources sat across from me with a checklist and the tired expression of someone who'd conducted this conversation hundreds of times. "Why are you leaving Ellison and Reid?" she asked, pen poised over her evaluation form. I considered my options. I could detail Grant's systematic theft of my work. I could explain how 7 years of contribution had earned me nothing but the role of anonymous ghostwriter. I could describe the slow suffocation of watching someone else build a career on my ideas. Instead, I chose simplicity. Creative differences. Patricia nodded, making a note that would disappear into my permanent file. "Any recommendations for improvement?" "Better attribution policies might help retain talent," I said. 20 minutes later, I packed my personal items into a cardboard box while the office watched with varying degrees of curiosity and indifference. Nobody clapped. Nobody made speeches about my contributions. Grant observed from his glass office, that familiar smirk playing at his lips. "Good luck out there, kid," he called as I headed toward the elevator. I paused at the reception desk, looking back at him one final time. "You'll need it more than I will." The elevator doors closed on his confused expression. My new apartment was a basement studio in Lincoln Park, furnished with items from the previous tenant and lit by a single lamp that flickered when the upstairs neighbors walked too heavily. Rent was affordable because natural light was theoretical and the heating system had personality disorders. But it was mine. And in the corner, next to my laptop and a growing collection of energy drink cans, I began building something that Grant could never steal because he'd never understand it well enough to replicate it. The predictive analytics software started as revenge, pure and simple. I wanted to prove that the ideas he'd dismissed were worth more than his ability to present them in expensive suits. But as weeks turned into months, the project evolved into something larger. Late nights blended into early mornings as I refined algorithms, tested variables, and built user interfaces that could translate complex data into actionable marketing strategies. No funding, no support team, no corporate resources. Just determination and the quiet satisfaction of creating something genuinely innovative. The prototype was crude but functional. When I ran it against publicly available marketing data, the results were stunning. My software could predict consumer behavior with 87% accuracy, 3 months in advance. It worked. And Grant had no idea it existed. The first pitch meeting took place in a sleek downtown office where a mid-sized e-commerce company was struggling to understand why their customer acquisition costs had tripled without corresponding revenue increases. I'd researched their challenges for weeks, building a presentation that demonstrated exactly how my software could solve their problems. The marketing director loved it. Her team asked technical questions that I answered with confidence born from months of development and testing. By the end of the hour, they were discussing implementation timelines and budget allocations. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," the director said, already drafting a contract in her head. "When can we start?" Then her phone rang. A brief conversation in the hallway. When she returned, her enthusiasm had cooled considerably. "I'm sorry, Allison. We've decided to postpone this project indefinitely." I gathered my materials with steady hands, maintaining professional composure until I reached my car. Then I called the director back. "May I ask what changed?" I said. Her pause lasted too long. "Grant Ellison said he built this model 2 years ago. He's threatening legal action if we move forward." I hung up and sat in the parking lot, hands trembling with rage that had nowhere to go. He was still stealing from me, even after I'd left. The coffee shop on Michigan Avenue was busy with the lunch crowd when I found a corner table and opened my laptop, trying to process the morning's humiliation. How could Grant claim ownership of something he'd never seen? How could his reputation carry more weight than demonstrable proof of innovation? An older man at the next table must have overheard my frustrated phone call to my lawyer, because he leaned over with the kind of smile that suggested both sympathy and experience. "Startup troubles?" he asked. I looked up from my screen, taking in his expensive but understated clothing, the confidence that comes from decades of success, and the genuine curiosity in his eyes. "Former colleague is claiming he invented something I built," I said, closing my laptop with a sigh. "Show me," he said simply. 20 minutes later, Felix Hartmann was studying my software with the focused attention of someone who'd spent 40 years building and selling technology companies. His questions were precise, technical, and increasingly excited. "You built this entire algorithm yourself?" he asked. I nodded, watching him scroll through documentation that proved authorship and development timelines. He handed me his business card. The title read Managing Partner, Hartmann Ventures. "Let's talk about investment," he said. "And protection." Reid Analytics LLC was officially registered on a Wednesday morning in November, with Felix's legal team ensuring that intellectual property protections were ironclad from day one. The office was a shared workspace in River North, barely large enough for 2 desks, but it was legitimate and growing. My first official client was Westside Boutique, a local e-commerce brand that sold handmade jewelry to millennials with disposable income and Instagram accounts. Their previous marketing agency had generated impressive reach but disappointing conversions. I implemented my predictive model over a 6-week period, identifying optimal timing for promotional campaigns, target demographics that competitors were ignoring, and content strategies that aligned with authentic consumer behavior patterns. Results were immediate and dramatic. Click-through rates doubled. Conversion rates tripled. Revenue increased by 140% in the first quarter. "This is incredible," said Amanda, Westside's founder, reviewing the quarterly report I'd prepared. "Whatever you're charging, it's not enough." She doubled our retainer agreement and referred me to 3 other boutique brands looking for similar results. That same month, I noticed that Ellison and Reid had lost the Westside account. Grant's agency had been their previous marketing partner, the one whose strategies had failed to generate meaningful conversions. Irony, as it turned out, had a sense of timing. Grant's phone call came on a Friday afternoon while I was reviewing proposals from potential new clients. His name on my caller ID triggered a complex mixture of anger and curiosity that ultimately resolved in favor of entertainment. "Allison," his voice carried forced cheerfulness that didn't quite mask underlying concern. "Heard you're doing the startup thing. Very cute." I leaned back in my desk chair, watching traffic move past my window 20 floors below. "Hello, Grant." Look, I wanted to clear the air about that misunderstanding with Morrison e-commerce. Legal departments get jumpy, you know? Nothing personal. Of course not, I said, making notes on a client proposal while he talked. The thing is, he continued, this whole freelance consultant path is tough. Really tough. I've seen talented people crash and burn because they don't understand the business side. I appreciate your concern. Maybe we could grab coffee? Talk about bringing you back to Allison and Reid? Senior position, real resources, chance to work on major campaigns again? I smiled at my reflection in the computer screen. I'm happy where I am, Grant. His laugh sounded strained. You'll crash and come crawling back when reality hits. I ended the call without responding. Some predictions were easier to make than others. Reid Analytics expanded faster than I'd anticipated. Every satisfied client became a referral source, every successful campaign became a case study that attracted more sophisticated prospects. I reinvested every dollar of profit into better technology, improved processes, and eventually, my first employee. Lydia was a recent Northwestern graduate with a master's degree in data science and the kind of hungry intelligence that reminded me of my younger self. She understood algorithms intuitively and could translate technical capabilities into client benefits with remarkable clarity. I can't believe you built this entire system alone, she said during her first week, reviewing the software architecture I'd developed in my basement apartment. This is graduate-level machine learning. Working with someone who appreciated the technical complexity was refreshing after years of dumbing down explanations for executives who thought analytics meant counting clicks. Lydia asked questions that pushed me to improve the system, identified optimization opportunities I'd missed, and contributed ideas that made the software genuinely collaborative. By spring, our client roster had grown to include 12 companies across 6 industries. Revenue had tripled from our modest beginning, and our retention rate was 100%. You know who's been asking questions about our client list? Lydia mentioned one afternoon, reviewing our latest analytics reports. I looked up from my computer. Grant? She nodded. Trying to reverse engineer our approach based on public results. The warning came from Marcus, a former colleague who'd stayed at Ellison and Reid despite growing frustration with Grant's management style. We met for drinks at a quiet bar in the Loop, away from industry crowds who might report our conversation back to the wrong people. He's planning something, Marcus said, stirring his whiskey with nervous energy. Grant's been telling clients that your software is based on proprietary research he developed at Ellison and Reid. I felt familiar anger rising but kept my voice level. Based on what evidence? He doesn't need evidence. He just needs doubt. Potential clients hear that there might be legal issues, and they back away from working with you. How many clients has he contacted? Marcus looked uncomfortable. At least 6 that I know of. Maybe more. I thanked him for the warning and drove home thinking about intellectual property law, documentation requirements, and the difference between stealing ideas and claiming ownership of innovations you never understood. That night, I filed a provisional patent for my predictive analytics system, complete with development timelines, source code documentation, and detailed technical specifications that proved authorship beyond any reasonable doubt. Grant could claim whatever he wanted. But claims require proof, and proof was something I'd been carefully collecting since the day I left Ellison and Reid. The email from Titan Analytics arrived on a Tuesday morning, simple and direct in the way that serious business propositions often are. We're interested in discussing a potential licensing partnership for your predictive analytics platform. Titan was Grant's biggest competitor, a multinational agency that specialized in data-driven marketing for Fortune 500 companies. They'd been watching Reid Analytics' growing reputation with the kind of professional curiosity that eventually transforms into strategic opportunity. The meeting took place in their downtown headquarters, 30 floors above the city with panoramic views that made everything seem possible. Victoria Chen, their chief technology officer, had reviewed my software documentation with the thorough attention of someone who understood both technical innovation and market potential. This is sophisticated work, she said, scrolling through performance metrics from our client implementations. Your accuracy rates are significantly higher than industry standards. We discussed integration possibilities, scalability requirements, and revenue-sharing arrangements that would provide Reid Analytics with resources to expand while giving Titan access to genuinely cutting-edge technology. The partnership agreement was more generous than I'd expected. Exclusive licensing rights, substantial upfront payment, and ongoing royalties that would fund expansion into enterprise-level clients. When can we announce this publicly? Victoria asked as we finalized contract details. I smiled, thinking about timing and market positioning and the sweet satisfaction of success that speaks louder than any argument. Let's make it official next week. The press release went live on a Thursday morning. Titan Analytics unveils revolutionary predictive marketing engine, powered by Reid Analytics innovation. My phone started buzzing immediately. Industry publications wanted interviews. Potential clients requested demonstrations. Competitors tried to schedule meetings to discuss their own partnership opportunities. But the message that caught my attention was a missed call from Grant, followed by a voicemail that I played 3 times before deciding not to return. Allison, this is Grant. We need to talk immediately. This Titan partnership is based on intellectual property that belongs to Ellison and Reid. Call me back. I forwarded the voicemail to my attorney, along with copies of my patent filing, development documentation, and the detailed timeline that proved I'd created the software months after leaving Grant's company. Some conversations weren't worth having. Some claims weren't worth dignifying with responses. I had work to do and a business to run. Grant's panic was no longer my problem to solve. The industry grapevine carried news faster than official announcements. By Friday afternoon, I'd heard through 3 different sources that chaos was spreading through Ellison and Reid's executive offices like a strategic virus. Marcus called with updates that would have been funny if they weren't so predictable. 2 major clients canceled their contracts today. Said they want to work with agencies that have access to cutting-edge analytics. How's Grant handling it? I asked. He threw a coffee mug at his office wall. Spent 20 minutes screaming at Patricia about employment contracts and non-compete clauses. The irony was perfect. Grant had built his reputation by claiming credit for innovations he'd never understood. Now those same clients were leaving him for access to real innovation he couldn't replicate. What's the board saying? I asked. Emergency meeting scheduled for Monday morning. Investors are asking hard questions about revenue projections and competitive positioning. I thanked Marcus for the information and spent the weekend reviewing expansion plans for Reid Analytics. Titan's partnership provided resources to hire additional developers, improve our software platform, and target enterprise clients who needed sophisticated marketing solutions. Grant's crisis was creating opportunities I'd never anticipated. Sometimes the best revenge was simply being better at the work than the people who'd underestimated you. The invitation arrived by courier on Monday afternoon, printed on heavy cardstock with elegant typography that suggested both prestige and tradition. Chicago Marketing Association Annual Gala, Innovator of the Year Awards. My name appeared on the nominee list for Outstanding Technology Innovation, alongside established industry leaders whose companies had shaped marketing practices for decades. The ceremony would take place at the Palmer House Hotel, with 300 industry professionals attending. The host organization was listed at the bottom of the invitation, Ellison and Reid Marketing, in partnership with the Chicago Marketing Association. I stared at the invitation for several minutes, processing the implications. Grant's company was hosting an event where I was nominated for an award recognizing innovation he'd tried to claim as his own work. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. I RSVP'd yes immediately, then called Lydia to discuss what I should wear to receive recognition for ideas that Grant had insisted weren't needed. This is going to be legendary, she said, already planning our preparation strategy. It already is, I replied, thinking about 6 months of careful documentation, strategic partnerships, and patient persistence that had led to this moment. Some stories write themselves. Others require careful authorship and perfect timing. The mirror in my apartment reflected someone I barely recognized. The black dress was elegant without being flashy, professional enough for industry recognition but fitted enough to suggest confidence that came from genuine achievement rather than borrowed credibility. Lydia helped with final preparations, reviewing talking points we'd rehearsed for potential media interviews and industry conversations that would inevitably focus on Reid Analytics' rapid growth and tightened partnership. "Are you nervous?" she asked, adjusting the small diamond pin that had belonged to my grandmother. I considered the question honestly. 6 months ago, I would have been terrified. 6 months ago, I was still playing the role of grateful protégé, accepting scraps of recognition while someone else built a career on my ideas. "No," I said, slipping a small flash drive into my purse. "I'm prepared." The flash drive contained comprehensive documentation of my software development process, timestamped files that proved authorship, and correspondence that established a clear timeline of innovation. Not because I expected to need it, but because preparation had become a habit that served me well. "What's on the drive?" Lydia asked. I smiled, thinking about evidence and truth and the difference between claims and proof. "Insurance," I said. Grant met me at the Palmer House entrance with the kind of forced charm that public events demand from industry leaders. His smile was practiced, his handshake firm, and his eyes carried the barely controlled panic of someone whose carefully constructed world was dissolving faster than he could repair it. "Allison," he said, loud enough for nearby photographers to capture what looked like a friendly conversation between former colleagues. "I have to admit, I didn't think you'd show tonight." I accepted a champagne glass from a passing server, maintaining the polite smile that industry events require. "I don't miss important moments, Grant." "Of course not. Always been ambitious, haven't you?" The ballroom buzzed with conversation as marketing executives networked around cocktail tables, their discussions blending business strategy with personal gossip in the way that professional gatherings inevitably do. On the main stage, a large screen displayed the Ellison and Reid logo alongside photos of the evening's award nominees. When my headshot appeared as part of the Outstanding Technology Innovation category, I noticed Grant's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Quite an honor," he said, his voice carrying undertones that suggested the honor might be temporary. Behind us, the presentation screen flickered as technicians prepared for the evening's formal program. What appeared next made my champagne taste sweeter than it had any right to. The slide that appeared on screen was meant to showcase Ellison and Reid's latest technological capabilities. Instead, it displayed my patent watermark superimposed over what was clearly Grant's attempt to recreate my predictive analytics software. The watermark was impossible to miss: Reid Analytics, patent pending, unauthorized use prohibited. Conversations around us gradually quieted as people noticed the display. Murmurs spread through the crowd like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Smartphones appeared as guests captured images of what would become tomorrow's industry gossip. Grant's face went pale as he realized what was happening. Someone in his technical team had unknowingly used slides that contained stolen elements from my original presentation, complete with intellectual property protections that made the theft legally actionable. I finished my champagne and walked toward the stage, where a microphone waited for the evening's recognition ceremony. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system. "Before we celebrate innovation, perhaps we should clarify ownership." The room fell silent as I connected my laptop to the presentation system. 30 seconds later, the screen displayed a chronological timeline of my software development, complete with timestamps, version histories, and documentation that proved authorship beyond any reasonable doubt. "Innovation requires both creativity and integrity," I continued. "Tonight, I'm honored to represent both." The applause started slowly, then built into sustained recognition that acknowledged not just technical achievement but the courage to claim credit for work that belonged to me. Grant was gone before I finished speaking. Friday morning's industry publications carried headlines that I'd dreamed about but never expected to see: Ellison and Reid executive exposed for intellectual property theft and former employee proves ownership of disputed marketing technology. The Chicago Business Journal's coverage was particularly thorough, including interviews with former Ellison and Reid employees who confirmed patterns of credit misattribution and idea appropriation that had apparently been ongoing for years. Grant's professional reputation, built over decades of borrowed credibility and strategic positioning, collapsed in the span of a single news cycle. Stock prices for Ellison and Reid's parent company dropped 12% in morning trading. By noon, the board of directors had scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss leadership changes and liability issues related to intellectual property disputes. Marcus called with updates that felt like chapters in a morality tale about hubris and accountability. "He's been asked to resign," Marcus reported. "Effective immediately. The board wants to distance themselves from potential legal complications." "What about the rest of the team?" I asked. "Most people are relieved. Grant's management style was toxic. Someone else can probably turn things around." I hung up thinking about consequences and justice and the way that truth eventually surfaces despite people's best efforts to bury it. The new CEO of Ellison and Reid called me personally on Monday morning. Her name was Catherine Wells, and she'd been brought in from outside the company to rebuild credibility and establish ethical leadership practices that would prevent future intellectual property disasters. "Ms. Reid," she said, her voice professional but warm. "I'd like to discuss licensing your analytics platform for our client services. We understand we need to do this properly." We met in a neutral conference room downtown, away from the Ellison and Reid offices that still carried traces of Grant's toxic management culture. Catherine was direct, intelligent, and refreshingly honest about the company's need to rebuild both client relationships and industry reputation. "We're prepared to offer substantial compensation for licensing rights," she said, sliding a contract across the table. "Both for past unauthorized use and future legitimate partnership." The numbers were impressive. 7 figures for comprehensive licensing rights, plus ongoing royalties that would fund Reid Analytics expansion for years to come. "This seems generous," I said, reviewing terms that were significantly more favorable than I'd expected. Catherine smiled. "We're paying for more than technology. We're paying for forgiveness and the chance to rebuild trust." I signed the contract thinking about irony and justice and the way that Grant's former company was now paying me to survive. Grant's email arrived 3 weeks later, sent from a personal account to my business address with the subject line, "Please. Let's talk." The message was brief but loaded with the kind of desperation I recognized from my own lowest moments. "I know I made mistakes. I know you have every right to be angry. But please don't let this destroy everything I built. I'll do whatever you need." I read it twice, thinking about forgiveness and consequences and the difference between accountability and revenge. Then I printed the email, placed it in an expensive frame, and hung it on my office wall. Below it, I mounted a small placard with the quote that had started everything: "We don't need your ideas." Lydia found the display when she came to discuss our latest client proposals. "That's cold," she said, studying the framed email with something between admiration and concern. "It's educational," I replied. "For clients who want to understand what happens when people underestimate innovation." I never responded to Grant's email. Some conversations don't require answers. Some lessons speak for themselves. 2 years later, Reid Analytics occupied 3 floors of a downtown Chicago high-rise with 47 employees and client relationships that spanned 6 countries. The Forbes 30 Under 30 in Technology feature had led to speaking engagements, board positions, and partnership opportunities that seemed impossible when I was working in a basement apartment with a flickering lamp. The Chicago Marketing Association invited me to keynote their annual conference, the same event where Grant had once commanded attention through borrowed ideas and strategic positioning. Standing backstage, I could hear 3,000 marketing professionals settling into their seats, ready to learn about innovation, leadership, and the courage to bet on yourself when others won't see your potential. My speech would focus on intellectual property protection, ethical leadership, and the importance of creating cultures where innovation is rewarded rather than stolen. But underneath those professional themes was a simpler message about persistence and justice and the way that truth eventually wins when you have the patience to document it properly. The conference organizer approached with a microphone and a smile that suggested she understood the symbolic importance of this moment. "Ready to inspire some innovators?" she asked. I thought about Grant, somewhere in the audience or maybe watching from home, finally understanding that the ideas he'd dismissed were worth more than his ability to steal them. "Absolutely," I said. The auditorium fell silent as I took the stage, facing an audience that included former colleagues, industry leaders, and young professionals who reminded me of my earlier self. The lights were warm against my face, and the city skyline visible through tall windows suggested possibilities that seemed unlimited. "When someone tells you your ideas don't matter," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system, "remember that they only say that because they can't see your vision." I talked about innovation and integrity, about the importance of documentation and the courage to claim credit for work that belongs to you. I shared stories about basement apartments and small victories and the patient persistence required to build something meaningful from nothing. Behind me, the presentation screen displayed the Reid Analytics logo alongside our partnership with Titan Global, our client success stories, and the growth metrics that proved sustained excellence rather than temporary luck. "Ideas have power," I concluded, looking out at faces that reflected hope and determination and the hunger for achievement that drives true innovation. But only when they're matched with the courage to protect them and the integrity to claim them. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. As I left the stage, my phone was already buzzing with messages from potential partners, clients, and speaking bureaus that wanted to share this story with other audiences. Grant had said they didn't need my ideas. It turned out everyone else did. And that, as it happened, made all the difference.